Why do you remain silent? Are you the Son of God?
My God! My God! Why have you forsaken me?
He has risen, Alleluia, the victory is won.
Before hope was reborn, there was a morning that felt unbearably silent. The sky was not dramatic. The earth did not tremble. There were no crowds, no celebrations, only the quiet weight of loss pressing down on broken hearts. Just days earlier, everything had seemed so certain. There was a teacher who spoke with authority, a healer who restored the impossible, a man many believed was the answer, and then he was gone, crucified, buried, sealed behind stone. The disciples huddled together in a room grieving together, reflecting. On the day before and totally bewildered. There are moments in history that change everything, moments so heavy, so sacred, that time itself seems to pause and hold its breath. And then there is this moment. The day heaven went silent. Not quiet. Not distant silent, because on that day, something happened that had never happened before, and has never happened since. The Son of God, the one who opened blind eyes, who raised the dead, who spoke storms into stillness, was hanging on a cross, bleeding, gasping, dying. And heaven said, nothing. No thunder, no angel armies, no divine interruption, just silence. Imagine being there, the sky, once bright, now turning dark in the middle of the day. Not a natural sunset, but a supernatural darkness that crept across the land like a warning, like creation itself was mourning. The air thick, heavy, unsettling, people whispering, some mocking, some watching, some weeping. Roman soldiers standing guard, trying to appear unmoved. But even they could feel it. Something about this execution was different. This was not just another man. This was Jesus, the one many believed was the Messiah, the hope of Israel, the one who was supposed to save them. And now he was nailed to wood. Hands pierced, feet torn open, a crown of thorns pressed into his head, not just causing pain, but mockery, a cruel parody of kingship. King of the Jews, they said. But this did not look like a king. This looked like defeat. This looked like failure. This looked like the end. And maybe that's what made the silence even louder. Because if he truly was the Son of God, where was God? Why wasn't heaven responding? Why wasn't the earth opening up to swallow the injustice? Why weren't angels descending in fire? Why didn't God stop it? Even those closest to him were confused. The disciples who once walked boldly beside him were now scattered, afraid, hidden, gone. Peter, who once declared, "I will never leave you," had already denied him 3 times. The crowds who once shouted, "Hosanna," had turned into voices demanding his death. And now, the man who spoke with authority hung there, struggling to breathe. Every inhale a battle, every exhale a surrender. And then, it happened. In the middle of the darkness, in the middle of the silence, Jesus cried out with a voice that pierced through heaven and earth, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Think about that. Not Father, not Lord, but my God. Why? Why have you abandoned me? This was not just pain. This was not just physical suffering. This was something deeper, something spiritual, something cosmic. Because for the first time in eternity, the Son was experiencing separation, and heaven did not answer. No response came. No. Voice echoed back, just silence. And if you listen closely, that silence tells a story, because it wasn't the silence of absence. It was the silence of something happening behind the scenes. Something so powerful that heaven itself held back. Because while it looked like Jesus was losing, something else was unfolding, something invisible, something eternal. The loudest declaration of victory the world would ever know. In the moment that looked like the greatest defeat, God was accomplishing the greatest victory. Because that day was not just about a man dying on a cross, it was about sin being confronted, darkness being challenged, and a price being paid that humanity could never pay on its own. But right then, for those who loved him, the world did not just change, it collapsed. Dreams didn't just fade, they were shattered. Expectations didn't just weaken, they died. And in their place came a silence so deep, it felt permanent. Mary Magdalene walked toward the tomb with a heart too heavy to understand what it was about to witness. Every step carried grief. Every breath carried memory. The voice that once called her name with compassion was now, she believed, forever silent. But something was about to happen that would shatter every expectation. Why was the stone rolled away? Why was the body missing? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what do you do when the person you've lost is no longer where you left them? This is not just a story about a miracle. It is a story about confusion before clarity, about doubt before belief, about the fragile space between despair and hope. Because on that morning, nothing made sense at first. Even when angels spoke, it didn't fully register. Even when truth stood right in front of her, she didn't recognize it. Why? Why didn't she see him? Why did those closest to him struggle to believe what was unfolding before their eyes? And what does it reveal about us, that sometimes even when hope is standing right in front of us, we fail to see it? This story will take us from an empty tomb to a whispered name that changes everything, to running feet, locked rooms, burning hearts on a dusty road, and a broken man restored by love. And by the end, one truth will become impossible to ignore. Resurrection was not just an event, it was an invitation that still stands, even now, even for you. Mary reached the tomb while the world was still caught between night and morning. It was that quiet hour where everything feels suspended, as if creation itself is holding its breath, the kind of silence that amplifies grief, the kind that makes absence feel louder than presence ever did. She wasn't coming with expectation. She was coming with sorrow. The spices in her hands were not symbols of hope. They were final acts of love. This was closure. This was goodbye, made tangible. Every step she took was heavy, not just with emotion, but with finality. This was the last thing she could do for the one who had changed her life. But the moment she arrived, something was wrong. The stone. It was moved, not slightly shifted, not disturbed, gone from its place. Her heart didn't leap with hope. It dropped with fear. Panic rushed in before understanding ever had a chance. Someone had taken him. That was the only explanation her grief would allow. Not resurrection, not miracle, just loss, repeated in a crueler way. It felt like the final insult to an already unbearable reality. She turned and ran. Every step fueled by confusion, by urgency, by a desperate need to make sense of what she had just seen. When she reached the disciples, her words tumbled out, breathless and broken. "They've taken the Lord, and we don't know where they've put him." There was no hint of hope in her voice, only devastation. But something pulled her back to the tomb, drawn again to the place where everything felt undone. Mary returned, this time slower, heavier. And when she stood outside, the weight of it all finally broke through. She wept, not quiet tears, not controlled sorrow. She wept as someone who had lost everything twice, as someone whose last thread of connection had just been taken away. The past few days replayed in her mind, the cross, the suffering, the final breath, and now even the body was gone. And through those tears, she bent down and looked inside. The tomb. Two figures sat there, Angels, where his body had been, but even this didn't fully register. "Woman, why are you crying?" they asked, because to her, the answer was obvious. "Because they have taken my Lord," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." Even in the presence of the supernatural, her pain kept her anchored to a natural explanation. Sometimes, when grief is loud enough, even miracles feel distant. Then she turned and saw a man standing there. But she didn't recognize him. Grief has a way of blinding us. It narrows our vision. It convinces us that what we expect is all that exists. And in that moment, Mary saw not a risen Savior, but a gardener. Someone ordinary. Someone irrelevant to the miracle unfolding right in front of her. "Woman," he asked gently, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Still searching, still assuming loss. "Sir," she said, "if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Even in her pain, there was devotion. Even in her confusion, there was love. She didn't care how impossible it sounded. She just wanted him back. Then, everything changed. One word, just one. Mary. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was unmistakable. The same voice that had once called her out of darkness now called her out of despair. The same voice that had restored her dignity now restored her hope. And suddenly, the fog lifted. Recognition didn't come through sight. It came through relationship. "Rabboni," she cried. "Teacher, alive." In that instant, grief collided with joy. Confusion gave way to clarity. Death lost its final word. Everything she thought had ended was beginning again. The impossible was no longer distant. It was standing right in front of her. The one she came to mourn was standing in front of. Her living, breathing, real, and nothing would ever be the same again. Mary didn't walk away from that moment. She ran, not with the same desperation as before, but with something entirely different burning inside her. Her steps were no longer driven by fear, but by revelation. The grief that had weighed her down, just moments ago, now seemed to lift with every stride. She had seen him, not imagined, not hoped, seen, alive. And yet, how do you explain something like that? How do you put into words what your heart is still trying to catch up with? Her thoughts raced faster than her feet. Questions and certainty collided within her. He's alive. But will they believe me? She didn't slow down. When she reached the disciples, her voice carried urgency. But this time, it was different. It wasn't broken by despair. It was overwhelmed by truth. "I have seen the Lord." Simple words, but they carried a weight that history itself would never outgrow. The room shifted. Silence. Then confusion. Some stared at her. Others shook their heads. It sounded impossible. It felt too sudden, too good, too unbelievable. Just days ago, they had watched him die. They had seen the finality of it. Death, in their minds, had already won. Hope was not something they were ready to feel again. Fear still lingered in the room. Doors were kept closed. Voices were kept low. The world outside still felt dangerous, uncertain, and hostile. And now, this claim, this impossible claim, was asking them to believe again. But something in her voice, something in her conviction, unsettled them. Peter didn't wait. Neither did John. They ran. Side by side at first, then faster, pushing past exhaustion. Driven by the same question, what if it's true? John reached the tomb first. He stopped at the entrance, catching his breath, peering inside but not stepping in. There it was, the emptiness. The linen cloths lying there, undisturbed. Not the scene of a rushed theft, but something strangely, Intentional. Peter arrived moments later, and he didn't hesitate. He went straight in, always the first to act, always the first to move before fully understanding. He saw the same thing. The cloths, folded, ordered. Not chaos, not theft. Something else. Something they couldn't yet explain. John stepped in after him, and in that quiet, in that stillness where a body should have been, something shifted inside him. He saw, and he believed. Not fully, not clearly. But something awakened. A spark of understanding began to form, even if it wasn't complete yet, because belief doesn't always arrive all at once. Sometimes, it begins as a question that refuses to go away. They left the tomb with more than they came with. Not answers, but possibility. And sometimes, possibility is where faith begins. Behind them, the empty tomb remained. Silent, but no longer meaningless. It was now a message. One that would echo far beyond that morning. Death had not held him, and deep within them, even without full understanding, hope had quietly begun to rise again. The room was locked, not just physically, but emotionally. Fear had sealed every door, every window, every conversation. The same men who had once walked boldly beside him were now hiding, whispering, trying to make sense of a world that no longer felt safe. Mary's words still echoed in the air. I have seen the Lord. But seeing and believing were not the same thing. Some wanted to believe, others didn't dare. Because if it wasn't true, the disappointment would destroy what little strength they had left. And then it happened. Without warning, without sound. He was there, standing among them. No door opened. No footsteps approached. Just presence. Real, undeniable, unexplainable, and everything stopped. Peace be with you. Not a loud declaration. Not a forceful entrance. But a calm that cut through chaos like light through darkness. They froze. He showed them his hands. The wounds. He showed them his side. The proof. This was not an idea, not a vision, not a memory. It was him alive. The room shifted instantly. Fear collapsed into astonishment. Grief dissolved into something they didn't yet have words for. Joy, but almost too overwhelming to hold, because this changed everything. Death had been defeated, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, and then he breathed on them. Receive the Holy Spirit. It was more than reassurance. It was empowerment. The same men who were hiding were being prepared. Prepared for something bigger than themselves. Prepared to carry a message the world would struggle to believe, but one was missing. Thomas. When they told him, their voices carried urgency, conviction, almost desperation. We have seen the Lord. But Thomas couldn't accept it. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. He had watched him die. He had felt the weight of that loss, and he refused to rebuild hope on something uncertain. Unless I see the nail marks, unless I touch them, I will not believe. It wasn't rebellion, it was wounded honesty. Days passed, tension lingered, questions remained. Then again, the room, closed, locked. And suddenly, he was there, standing in the same space where doubt had been spoken out loud. Peace be with you. But this time, his focus was clear. Thomas, no explanation, no correction, just invitation. Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. The room held its breath. This was the moment, not just for Thomas, but for all of them. For every question, every hesitation, every internal battle between fear and faith. Thomas didn't need to touch him. Not anymore. Because now doubt had collided with undeniable truth. My Lord and my God. Not just belief, surrender, recognition, transformation. And Jesus responded, not just to Thomas, but to every future generation. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And in that moment, the story expanded. It was no longer just about them. It was about everyone, every person who would wrestle with doubt, every heart that would question, every soul searching for something real. The doors were still locked, but something had changed. They were no longer hiding from fear. They were standing in the presence of victory. The fear that once controlled them had been confronted. The doubt that once paralyzed them had been answered, and in its place, something unstoppable began to rise. A boldness, a certainty, a fire that would soon leave that room and reach the world. Two men walked away from Jerusalem, not running, not rushing, just walking. Slow steps on a long road, each one carrying the weight of confusion, disappointment, and unanswered questions. The city behind them held too many memories, too much pain, too many shattered expectations. They had believed, truly believed, that he was the one who would restore, the one who would redeem, the one who would change everything. But now, everything had changed in a way they never expected. He was gone, and all that remained were rumors, an empty tomb, a story that sounded too impossible to trust. As they walked, they talked, replaying everything, trying to make sense of it, trying to hold on to something, anything, that still felt real. And then, a stranger joined them. No announcement, no recognition, just footsteps aligning with theirs. "What are you discussing, together as you walk along?" he asked. They stopped, faces downcast. "How can you not know?" one of them replied. "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" the stranger asked. And so they told him. About Jesus. About his power. His words. The hope they had placed in him. And the crushing reality of his crucifixion. "We had hoped," they said. Past tense. Hope. Now buried alongside expectation. They spoke of the women, the empty tomb, the angels, the claim that he was alive. But even as they spoke it, uncertainty filled their voices. It sounded distant, unreal, like something they wanted to believe but couldn't fully grasp. The stranger listened. Then he spoke. Not with force, not with overwhelming revelation, but with quiet authority. He began to explain. Piece by piece, moment by moment, scripture after scripture. He unfolded a story they thought they already knew, but had never truly understood. He showed them that this was not interruption, it was fulfillment, not failure, but purpose. And as he spoke, something shifted, not instantly, not dramatically, but slowly, deep within them. Their hearts began to burn, not with fear, not with confusion, but with recognition they couldn't yet explain. The road stretched on, the conversation deepened, and still, they did not know who he was. As they reached their destination, the stranger continued as if he would go further, but something in them resisted that. "Stay with us," they urged, because whatever this was, they didn't want it to end. So he stayed. They sat at the table, simple, ordinary, familiar. He took the bread, gave thanks, broke it. And in that moment, everything changed. Recognition, clear, immediate, undeniable. Their eyes were opened. It was him, the one they had been mourning, The one they had been talking about. The one who had been walking beside them all along, alive. And then, he was gone. No gradual fading. No explanation. Just absence. But this time, absence felt different. Because now they knew. They looked at each other, breathless. Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road? It all made sense now. Every word, every moment, every step. And suddenly, walking away from Jerusalem was no longer an option. They got up and ran back. Because the story wasn't over. It had only just been revealed. The shoreline was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Not outside, but within. The waves moved gently, brushing against the edge of the land as if nothing extraordinary had ever happened. But for Peter, everything had changed. He stood there with memories he could not escape. The fire, the questions, the denials. I don't know him. 3 times. Not whispered in confusion, but spoken in fear. And ever since that moment, something inside him had broken. Not just his courage, but his sense of who he was. The man who once said he would never fall had fallen harder than anyone else. And now, Jesus was alive. That should have been enough. But grace has a way of bringing us back, not just to celebrate, but to heal. They sat together after eating. No crowd, no pressure, just presence. Jesus turned to him, not with accusation, not with disappointment, but with something Peter didn't expect. Gentleness. Simon, son of John, do you love me? The question was simple, but it reached deep. Peter answered, Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs. Again. Simon, son of John, do you love me? This time it went deeper. Not just a question, but a mirror. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Tend my sheep. And then, a 3rd time. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now Peter felt it, not as accusation, but as restoration. 3 denials. Now 3 opportunities, 3 wounds. Now 3 healings. He answered this time with emotion. He could no longer hide, Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you. And Jesus responded, Feed my sheep. No rejection, no reminder of failure, only purpose, only restoration, only trust given again. In that moment, Peter wasn't defined by his worst decision. He was redefined by grace. Jesus didn't ignore the past. He redeemed it. He didn't dismiss the failure. He transformed it. And what Peter thought had disqualified him became the very place where restoration began. Because love restored what fear had broken, and calling followed forgiveness. The conversation ended not with shame, but with direction. Follow me. Simple, clear, personal. And in those 2 words, everything was made new, not just for Peter, but for anyone who has ever failed and thought it was the end. Because with him, it never is. And in that quiet moment, the weight he had carried began to lift. The past no longer held the final word. Grace did. They stood watching him. Not with confusion this time, not with fear, but with a growing understanding of what it all meant. The journey that began with grief at a tomb had led them here, to a moment where everything finally made sense. He had risen. He had restored. He had revealed. And now, he was ascending. Not leaving them behind, but sending them forward. His final words were not about endings. They were about beginnings. Go. Carry this message. Live this truth. And suddenly, the story was no longer just about what he had done. It was about what they would do next, Because the resurrection was never meant to stay in that morning. It was meant to move, to spread, to transform lives far beyond that moment. And that includes you, because the same questions still exist today. Moments of doubt, seasons of loss, times when hope feels distant or even gone. But this story reminds us of something powerful. What feels like the end is not always the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of something greater. The same voice that called Mary, the same presence that walked with the disciples, the same grace that restored Peter, still reaches today, still calls, still restores, still gives purpose. So wherever you are, right now, whatever you're facing, this is your reminder. Hope is not gone. It may be hidden, it may be unexpected, but it is alive. And just like that morning, everything can change. Because your story is not over yet. It is still being written, and the best part may still be ahead. Keep believing, keep moving forward, and never lose hope. If this message spoke to you, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that inspire and strengthen your faith.